Good morning. This is an open hearing of the independent inquiry into matters relating to Afghanistan. The use of mobile telephones in the courtroom or annex is prohibited, save for a limited dispensation to the State Corps participant teams for the purpose of seatings instructions. Please could I ask you to ensure that all other mobile telephones have been switched off or turned to silent. Please may I draw your attention to the fact that the Chair of the Inquiry, the Right Honourable Sir Charles Haddon-Cave, has made a restriction order in relation to this hearing. Copies of the restriction order are available on request, but in substance, the order has made the following effect. This order restricts attendance in the courtroom of the open hearing scheduled to hear evidence about the deletion of material, a UK Special Forces Headquarters computer server, known in these proceedings as ITS-1. Attendance in the courtroom in which the hearing is to be held, namely Court 73, is restricted as follows. To members of the inquiry team and the recognised legal representatives of the Corps participants and the following witnesses when they are giving evidence. N5857, a contractor and the infrastructure engineer. N5858, a contractor and the manager of N5857. 2. To members of the inquiry team and to the Corps participant recognised legal representatives only when the following witnesses are giving evidence. N5859, an officer in UKSF involved in information systems. N5595, who carries out internal investigation. N2311-UKSF, information manager. 3. Recognised legal representatives includes the legal team assisting the recognised legal representative in the discharge of the recognised legal representative's functions. 4. This order prohibits by restriction, publication or dissemination the identities of any of the witnesses listed in paragraph 2 above, or any information which might lead to their identification. The purpose of restricting attendance in the courtroom where the hearing is taking place is to protect both the witnesses' identities and this order. To ensure public access, a live video link of the hearing will be shown in the annex courtroom to which the public will have admittance. The live video link will not show the witnesses so that their physical appearance is concealed, but their evidence may be heard. In accordance with the General Restriction Order for Inquiry Hearings dated 23rd of October 2023, no person may disclose, publish or broadcast in any form or by any means anything that is said or done in the inquiry hearing room until 10 minutes after it takes place. Counsel to the inquiry or the solicitor to the inquiry must be informed of any request to make an application for a restriction order in relation to anything that has been said or done in the inquiry hearing room in the preceding 10 minutes. Anything that was said or done during that period will then be subject to a restriction order prohibiting its disclosure, repetition or duplication until the Chair has finally determined the application. Where such a request is made, the courtroom may be cleared for the Chair to consider whether there has been a breach of any restriction order, and both the live video link to the annex and the live stream YouTube recording will be temporarily stopped. Once the Chair has determined the matter in closed, the live video link to the annex room and to YouTube will be recommenced. The Chair will confirm if a restriction order is to be made and what steps, if any, are to be taken to ensure compliance. The above orders are subject to a penal notice. This means that any breach of any element of the restriction orders may be certified to the High Court or the Court of Session, who will have the power to fine or imprison anyone found to have been in breach of the order.
Mr. Glasgow.
Please, you, sir. We have already arranged for N5858 to be in the witness box, and thank you very much for coming back today, sir. Can I apologise that we were not able to reach you yesterday as we had expected, but thank you very much for accommodating our difficulties. So could I ask that the witness be sworn, and then we'll deal with the process of identifying him by his cipher number, and then use documentation to identify in secret his correct name.
Indeed. Can the witness be sworn, please? Thank you.
I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you.
For the purposes of your evidence today, have you asked to be known by the cipher number of N5858?
Yes.
Now, on your right-hand side, you should have a small lever arch red file. Could I ask you to pick that up, please? And could you turn behind tab number 1 to look at the contents with me? You'll see on this sheet there are a series of entries on the left-hand side giving numbers running from 1 sequentially down. And in the next column along, the cipher and N number is provided for a number of individuals. What you can then see in the other columns to the right, written in red, are the names and, where appropriate, ranks of certain individuals. If you're asked to look at this page at any stage at all, I don't want you to read out any of the information that appears in red, and I'm afraid I will keep reminding you of that to avoid any difficulty. Can I just ask you this? If you look, please, in the left-hand column for the numbers, run your finger down to number 10, and then look alongside that. Do you see the cipher N5858?
I do.
Alongside that, if you run your finger across the page, do we see there that we have your name recorded?
I do.
Before we leave this red file, could I ask you please to turn on to divider number 3 for a moment? And to make things more complicated, we've swapped the colouring over. So this time it's the left-hand side of the page you can't read and the right-hand side you can. If you look to the left-hand side, you'll see a number of entries recorded there. And what I'd like to ask you to do is to run your finger down the column where you reach the company or the civilian contractor for whom you were working back in the relevant period of time. And then when you run your finger across to the right-hand side, are we in a position to confirm the civilian contractor number with your help, please?
Civilian contractor 4.
And for the purposes of your statement, I think in the main you referred to that contractor as the company. And perhaps easiest for you if we'll use the phrase the company when describing them. If we need to talk about a different company and to distinguish that from anyone else, we may turn back to this particular document to help us.
Understood.
But having done that, could I ask you to close the red file up for a moment, to put that to one side. If we need to come back to it, or if you need to come back to it, we'll do so in due course.
Understood.
Can I check what you have available with you in the witness box? I see in front of you you've got a black file, and does that have within it your witness statement and some exhibits behind it?
ITS1, open hearings, N5858, open.
And if we go behind, it should be divider number 12, I think it's numbered. Do you have there your witness statement?
Yes.
And I'm just, wait for one moment, we're just going to check that the microphone is properly recording. I do apologise. It's my fault, I should have said beforehand. A lot of people are listening, not all of them are in this room, so I'm going to keep my voice nice and loud, try to match me. If you can't be heard, it's my fault, not yours, okay?
Understood.
All right.
If you'd like to move the mic slightly closer to you. Good. Thank you.
Now then, in the black file, which we were just looking at, your witness statement appears behind what is numbered 12 on the right-hand side. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Now, what I'd like to do is to take you through your witness statement, to ask you some questions about what is in it, and we may look at some of the exhibits that you've also got attached behind that witness statement. Okay?
Understood.
All right. Now, what we had done already is identify your name and the company for whom you worked. And again, we're going to call it the company, but it's Civilian Contractor 4 for the purposes of the ciphering. And you were asked in response to a request for information which was dated the 6th of October of this year to assist the inquiry with answering a number of questions about ITS1 and about the migration of data from one storage system to another storage system, and also about the use of S-delete. And do you remember setting out that information in the statement we're about to look at?
Yes.
Now, can I ask you, please, first of all, to help us with your role back in 2016? And if I take you in your statement to page 3 and to paragraph number 6. It may be that you don't need to look at paragraph 6 to tell us about your role, but so that everyone else knows what I'm asking about, I'm going to keep identifying the paragraph numbers. In 2016, were you what's known as a fourth-line IT support engineer in relation to ITS1?
That is correct.
And we've already heard evidence about the different lines of IT engineers and also about ITS1. But simply, again, for Please.
Thank you, Mr. Glasgow.
Thank you very much for the time. I was asking you about the meetings that took place on site, and you'd explained to us that the monthly meetings, and there's a difference between those and the meetings that might take place with the change team.
Correct.
What I'd like to ask you about is the meetings with the change team. Those you didn't know whether they were on a particular frequent pattern, but did they happen often?
The changes were as requested by the customer. So if the customer saw they had a new need or an updated requirement for the system, then that would be a change. And they put that change forward. So those changes could come in any time. That then goes through the contracts department, and then they price the work, and that comes through. Ultimately, it will come through to the support team because we're supporting it. I would help out in that respect because I understand how to help implement the system and changes to that.
If we focus for a moment on the change that I'd like to ask you about, which is the migration from data program 1 to the 3PAR system.
Correct.
Is that the sort of change which was discussed at meetings with the change group?
Yes.
And I've said meetings. Was there more than one meeting at which this was discussed?
I don't know how many meetings would have been held because that would have been outside my remit, normal remit. I may have been consulted on those kind of issues, but other than that, they would have been at a contractual level.
Were you present at meetings with the customer where your input as one of the lead IT engineers was required when it came to the movement from data program 1 to 3PAR?
Not initially. I may have had some input later on when they were considering, so how do we deal with the current system and moving forward to the replacement at that stage. But that would be later on in the process itself.
As far as the migration is concerned and the movement to the 3PAR system, we've heard from your former colleague N5857 about a course that was run by the providers of the 3PAR system and a course which you and he attended.
Yes.
And we understand from having looked at emails with him that the course ran between the 23rd and the 27th of May of 2016.
I believe that's the case, yes.
And have you also looked at emails? I don't need to take you to them, but have you had a chance to check emails which include the dates of the course?
Yes.
Now, what I'd like to ask you about is this, please. In terms of S-delete and the information that you were provided about it on the course, were you aware of the application S-delete before you went on that course?
Not in its explicit use. Was I aware the tool existed? Yes. Have I ever used it prior to that point? No. And I was not aware that it could facilitate the function that 3PAR were suggesting it could.
And by that particular function, is that the ability to remove already deleted data and then to ensure that all the free space on the old drive is completely wiped with zeros so that it's not transported across as the migration?
Yes, correct.
So in effect, you only take what you need rather than bringing anything extraneous with you?
Yes.
So that's a function that you were not aware of until you had gone on the course?
Correct.
And we'll come to it in a moment, I suspect, in just a little more detail. But can I ask you this, please? Insofar as how ITS1 operated, because we're coming to talk about the possible deletion of data from it, were you aware whether or not ITS1 was backed up at any stage?
Yes.
And in terms of the frequency of backups, if there was more than one a year, can you help us with how often you understood ITS1 to be backed up?
The backup policies covered different aspects of the system. I believe the worst case backup policy was no longer than 2 weeks as a full backup. Incremental backups were taken at a higher frequency during that time. But because of the limitations and the quantities of data and services being backed up and the bandwidth to be able to do the backups, it took 2 weeks to cycle through all the services and all the data that was being backed up.
And when you say a full backup, can I ask this of you? When a full backup is carried out, is that only of the live data, or does it also capture any data that had been deleted by any of the users on the server?
The backups will capture all the data that was live on the system. Anything that was not accessible by the servers would not be backed up.
So if a file had been deleted just before a particular backup, you wouldn't find it on the next backup. You'd need to go back in time along the history of backups
Correct.
to a period before a particular file was deleted.
That's correct, yes.
In terms of the storage of backups, was that the responsibility of the company for whom you worked or UKSF?
That was UKSF.
Did you or your company have anything to do with facilitating the storage of any of the backups, be they the regular ones or the more fundamental ones done on a fortnightly basis?
We provided the mechanism and tools. We provided advice in terms of how the backups should be performed. I believe the third line engineers helped assist in determining the periodicity of the backups themselves and across the different services. The media, tapes, etc., was the remit of the customer to provide as a backup medium. If the backups were sent to hard disks, then that was the quantity of space in the hard disks that it could store over time, and then it would go on to tape after that. So there are various different solutions in terms of how the backup was stored and how long it was stored for. The longer term backups would have been pushed to tape.
And when you say the longer term backups, are you talking about the fortnightly backups or backups over a longer period than that?
Monthly and yearly backups.
Are you aware for how long those backups were kept?
Specific backups, no. The expectation would be that backups would be held for a year or years, but that was the customer's remit to handle.
And it may be that it's obvious from what you've just told us about the backups, but insofar as you or your colleagues having any knowledge of what was saved on the servers themselves, were you aware of the actual data itself?
The backup had a list of all the files that would be in the backup, not least to be able to search for and restore individual files. But beyond that, no.
And in the event that anyone wanted access to a backup in order to find a file that had been lost or deleted, is that something that your company and your IT support engineers would facilitate?
It would be either the engineers that were on site, or it could be the customer support team themselves that could facilitate that.
Did it all depend how far in the backups you needed to go before it reached someone like you?
It would be unlikely to reach me in terms of a backup unless there was a problem with the backups and trying to recover the data. In terms of the urgency of recovering the data, that would depend on who was on watch at the time, because it's 24/7 manned. So if they require data to be restored quickly, then it'll be whoever's in shift at the time. If it's during normal daytime working, then it could be one of the third line engineers, for example.
And just before we go to deal with 3PAR and S-delete in a little more detail, can I just ask you this before we leave the ITS1 server? Insofar as there's any sort of record kept of the actions that are carried out on a server like ITS1, is there any such thing as an audit log that records actions that happened on that particular server?
Yes. Part of the requirements for the system were that actions that were performed by users, log in, log out, email, access to websites, they were all audited, and emails were kept as part of the audit trail, and they were kept separately from the rest of the system.
In terms of access to files and anything kept within a file, would that be part of an audit log?
Depends whether the file was included into an email. If it was part of an email, then yes. If it was left on the file system, not necessarily. That would be part of a backup. If it was pushed to a website, then the website would show the audit of the file being published.
And what if a file was deleted from the server? Would that be recorded within the audit log?
That would be the same process if it was deleted from a web server, then it would be recorded. If it was just a file on the file system, not necessarily.
And as far as the audit logs are concerned, do you know for how long those audit logs were kept?
The requirement on the system, I believe, was that they should be kept for 5 years as per requirements from the MOD.
Did the company for whom you worked have anything to do with saving and storing the audit logs?
No, we only provided advice and context in order for them to facilitate that.
Can we go to 3PAR and in particular to the course that you attended and some of the information that you were made privy to on that course?
Yes.
3PAR was the new server to which the data held on data program 1 was to be migrated, and the providers of 3PAR ran the course that you attended, and you told us that on that course you came to learn about SDelete and the particular function that it had which enabled deleted data and free space to effectively be filled with binary zeros and then not migrated across.
Correct.
And we've gone through this in a little detail with 5857, and I'm not going to trouble you with it again, because I think everyone's as clear as they can be, having looked at the slides.
Okay.
What I'd like to ask you is this. You told us that you were aware of something similar to SDelete, but you weren't aware of the particular function that SDelete had of zeroing data prior to a migration.
Yes.
Were there other means that might have removed unnecessary data before a migration other than simply wiping them permanently?
The same function could be provided by other tools, but where SDelete command and the command line options provided a single command to do the work, the other commands were multiple options to do. SDelete provided a simplified mechanism of doing the same thing. In terms of it is in terms of writing zeros across the disk as opposed to deleting. The zeros would be putting across already what would be seen from the server's point of view as empty space, to align it to the storage point of view of empty space. The 3PAR sees zeros as free space, effectively. So when migration occurs, if it sees chunks of zeros, it wouldn't bother storing lots of zeros, it would store a reference to lots of zeros. So by doing so, we align what the front-end servers and what the users would see in terms of free space to what the storage saw as free space, and thereby facilitating the migration to allow it to work in a more streamlined fashion.
When you talk about facilitating the migration to work in a more streamlined fashion, if we imagine we've got the old server which has all the live data, plus some free space, plus all the deleted data, and what you're hoping to send across is just the live data to the new server.
Correct.
And not to waste time with free space or deleted data.
Correct.
And SDelete, in effect, is a tool which enables you to send just the live data across.
Correct.
And ultimately to have, if you've got it, a lot of free space and just the live data there.
Yes.
Presumably that means that the new server can work more efficiently because it's not cluttered up with stuff it doesn't need.
Correct.
Does it also mean that in sending from the old server to the new, when you're only sending across the live data and not free space or deleted data at the same time, does that mean the sending process, the migration, is quicker?
Yes.
So when you talk about facilitating and streamlining the process, is that what you have in mind?
Yes.
And can I just ask, as a matter of normal practice, in preparing for a migration, a transfer, there are a number of clean-up processes that would be employed to the same or similar effect, would there not?
Yeah. Yes. The part of the process would be the customer would have sent out a request for users to tidy up their space. For example, if users have downloaded items from web pages, they may not want to have 10 copies of the same thing that's already on the web server to be copied across. So they may ask them to remove those copies to free up some space. So those files would be freed up space as far as the server is concerned, but as far as the storage is concerned, it's still there. And that data would still go across and still take up the space.
So as a matter of general practice and knowledge, prior to a transfer, it would be normal and expected, would it, to have some sort of clean-up?
Yes.
You've just spoken about the customer contacting employees to talk about what's going to happen and urging them to look at their filing system.
Yes.
Rather than dealing with it in the abstract, if we can I ask you this? From your knowledge, do you know whether or not such advice was given by the customer, so by UKSF, to the users of the IT system, that there was to be a migration and they would need to tidy up their filing system?
I know tidy-up requests were sent out on occasions. I cannot recall specifically whether it was done in purpose of the migration.
But tidy-up requests were requests that went out to the users of ITS1.
Part of the reason for the migration to the 3PAR was the space was running out on the old system. And as they were running out, they would try to recover some space by asking users to tidy up their space.
So as far as the migration from data program 1 to 3PAR is concerned, is that something that was long in the planning?
Yes.
And when you agree with me that whether it was long in the planning, can I ask you this? Does that mean weeks, months, or more than months?
At least months. The getting the hardware ordered, getting the hardware fitted for the reference rig, working with it within the reference rig. We had a smaller component of the same equipment in the reference rig. Working through the migration process for our systems, and then rolling back to be able to repeat the process, so we understood it from the change team's point of view and from the support team's point of view. Delivering the equipment to site and obtaining a window in which the migration could take place and how physically the migration would take place. So that was definitely at least weeks, if not months, between the two.
And that leaves aside, obviously, the planning and any contractual negotiation that had to take place before that, so that the money was in place for all of this work to begin.
Yes.
From your knowledge, were there regular meetings at which this migration process was discussed?
I'm fairly certain that regular meetings would have occurred, but they would have been outside of my scope.
Having attended the course and understood better the effect of S-delete and what it might mean in terms of streamlining and facilitating the migration process, did you and your colleagues who were involved in the migration discuss using S-delete as had been recommended on the course?
Yes. It opened up an opportunity to streamline, as I said, the data that wasn't required to be copied across. The customer only wanted the live data to come across, as opposed to the data that was seen from the storage point of view, as opposed to the server point of view. And writing zeros across that to align both points of view allowed that to happen. S-delete was one of the options.
And when you say the customer wanted only the live data to be moved across, is that because that's what the customer told you, or because somebody else told you that?
I think it was an intimation by the customer that part of this is the migration takes time, and they wanted minimum downtime for numerous reasons. Not least extra work, extra hours working on site, plus the downtime of the system while the migration was taking place, and working out how to best facilitate that without having the system offline. which ultimately it would have to be for a period of time. So there's shorter time as possible to have the system offline.
So did you and your colleagues, or at least you and 5857 who've been on the course, did you discuss and agree on the use of S-Delete?
When asked about the tooling for zeroing the data, I said it's in the manuals that were provided by the course, and the choices are there. In terms of which ones to use, I tried the various different options. I left it up to the end users to choose which one to use, because ultimately S-Delete, by its very name, could be seen as contentious, and that would require permission by the customer for the third line guys to run it.
I was going to ask you about that just before we deal with the permission from the customer. You've just said that you'd leave it up to the end users to decide.
Sorry, third line.
Right, I just wanted to check. So you were made aware of S-Delete and how it operated, and in particular, the means by which it might streamline the migration process.
Not so much S-Delete, but the mechanism of zeroing the data.
And as to whether S-Delete was used or not, have I understood correct from what you've just told us that you left that up to the third line IT support engineers
Yes.
to decide whether they should run S-Delete?
It was a choice in terms of which tooling to use, but either way, I would expect, I can't remember directly, but I would expect them to gain permission for use of S-Delete specifically.
And that's what I'd like to ask you about, if I may, please. So you are educated on S-Delete and on the zeroing of data. Mm-hmm. A third-line engineer who is there with you, N5857, has the same advantage of going on that course. You allow your third-line ICT support engineers to determine which tool would best effect the migration.
The command usage was listed in the manuals provided by the training course to each member of the team that went on the training course. That was part of the training course's media. The instructions in terms of how to use the tool was listed there. There was S-Delete plus at least one other, if not two other, possible mechanisms of how it could be achieved. So the mechanism that was expected to be used would be one of those commands. As I said, S-Delete was the simplest to use, not necessarily the fastest, but it was certainly the simplest one to use. But because of the nature of S-Delete itself, that it had the extra additional functionality that could be contentious, that's where permission would need to be sought for that to be done.
And I'd like to ask you about that. When you describe S-Delete as contentious, our understanding of what we've been told is that S-Delete, when run, has the effect of completely wiping either already deleted data or removing any of the free space.
S-Delete has several functions, one of which is to erase data. As its name suggests, it is a secure deletion tool designed to be able to remove data such that it is not recoverable, hence the contentious nature of the tool. It is also able to write zero space data across what is currently perceived by the server to be empty space. It is that latter function that we were using it for, because it was the simplest mechanism of doing so. Writing zeros across the empty space was not deleting existing data, it was zeroing down already deleted space.
When it came to deleting deleted data, so the more contentious aspect of S-Delete, you've spoken about needing permission for this. Can you tell us a little bit about that, please?
So the tooling, S-Delete would not normally be on the system because of its nature, because of auditing requirements, etc. So putting that software on the system would have had to have a request through the customer, which, as it was run, I assume that was given. I understand it to have been given.
Can I just check that I've understood what you just told us? The actual program S-delete or the application S-delete, that was not already on the system. It had to be installed in order for it to be run.
It's a standalone program, so there's no installation. It just needs to be put onto the system to be run. The tooling is not, the software is not a standard tool that was delivered to the system. In the same way as a mechanic has many tools to work on cars, S-delete is a specialist tool to work on file systems and files. And as such, it is a specialist tool to put on the system, and as such, requires additional permission to be put on the system.
And additional permission from whom, please?
That would be the system managers of the customer system managers.
And were you part of the permission process, or are you simply recounting what your understanding is that happened?
I'm recounting my understanding.
If we just think about the effect of running S-delete on ITS1, it has, as you've just told us, the effect of permanently wiping data that has already been deleted.
I wouldn't say permanent. I wouldn't say permanent because it is only writing one layer of zeros. S-deletes other functions when it is used for taking data and erasing it such that it is less able to be recovered, writes multiple layers. And these are standards that have been written by Department of Defense and other security agencies. The layers of data that it writes is not just zeros. It will write ones and zeros, zeros and ones, multiple zeros, in layers of patterns to obfuscate what was written onto the system. One layer of zeros does not completely eradicate what was on the system. The data that is written to storage in terms of ones and zeros, although you would see it if you look at it in terms of ones and zeros, is, if I may go technical, for example, plus or minus 5 volts. And 1 may be plus volts, and 0 may be minus 5 volts. But there's a tolerance involved in that, and that may take it down to minus 3 volts and plus 3 volts. And that level of tolerance can be used to recover, so I understand, the historic data that's on the disk. So writing one layer of zeros on top of what is otherwise deleted, marked as deleted data, would not completely eradicate any data that's on that disk.
In terms of being able potentially to recover data that had been deleted by S-delete, does that require specialist forensic capability in order to do it?
If it's the multiple layers of writing using the S-delete function that is the more contentious component, then yes, it would certainly require that. If it was normally deleted data, still would require some forensic analysis on the disk anyway. Writing one layer of zeros on top of that adds to the complexity, but does not completely eradicate the data in the same way as that using the full functionality of the S-delete would have done.
In terms of seeking permission in order to use this particular tool, are you aware of what explanation, if any, was given to the customer about the effect of running S-delete on the data program material?
I believe the manual was used and referenced as part of the example. So I believe they understood the multiple write layers that S-delete could perform.
Can I interrupt you? When you say they understood, who is they, please?
The system managers for the customer's point of view.
So those people working for UKSF?
Yes.
So your belief is that they understood how the application would work on the existing servers?
Yes.
Were you present at any meetings where the running of S-delete or the effect of S-delete was discussed, or is this simply your understanding from others of what happened?
It's my understanding.
in terms of the running itself of S-Delete, can I take you to one of the exhibits that you've got in your black file? And I believe you will find it behind what's numbered as tab 15. And you will have your cipher number N585858 with an exhibit 3. If we just look to this, do we see here the content of an instant messaging conversation that took place between you and N5857?
Yes.
Now, I want to look at the last entry on this particular page, and then I want to look at the beginning of it and try to work out a chronology with your help, if that is possible.
Okay.
Now, if we look at the last entry, thank you very much indeed, we'll see the last entry recorded from N5857 as part of the conversation is timed at 17:55.
That is correct, yes.
And it reads, first pass at S-Delete on a VM, so slow.
Yes.
And do you recall this conversation taking place back in 2016 between you and N5857?
The text helps remind me, but yes.
As we look at what the words there, first pass at S-Delete on a VM, what does that mean to you, please?
So the system is not one server. The system is made up of multiple servers. The servers are virtual machines inside physical machines. So the virtual machines allow utilization of physical hardware where otherwise the hardware would be idle. It's a more efficient use of the physical space. Because there are multiple servers to run the command against, then the command needs to be run on each of the storage items within each of the servers. Hence, it will be run one at a time. Hence, first pass, and yes, it is slow because it is writing zeros, binary zeros, across a large ream of what would otherwise be seen as free space.
So as best as you can recollect, is this the when the phrase first pass is used, is your understanding that it's the first time that S-Delete is being used on any of the servers?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay. Now, can I check some timings with you, please, for a moment? If we look at the entry I've just invited your attention to, it's timed at 17:55.
Yes.
The entry above it is at 18:05.
Yes.
And if we run our finger up the page, we can see that the entries proceed in a sequential order, but they're going earlier and earlier as we run up. So 18:05 was the penultimate entry, 18:04 is the entry at the top of the page.
Yes.
And it would appear that the 17:55 entry does not sit in a chronological sequence to the other entries on this particular page.
That is true. Going back a page to the header, if I may.
And that, I think, is back probably 3 pages to the header. So, and again, we'll see the header is the top of what appears to be an email exchanged from N5857 to you, N5858.
Yes.
And the subject is conversation with N5857. The date is the 14th of June and the time is 17:56.
Yes.
Now, again, I was going to ask you about that time, so it may be that you can assist with the chronological order and what significance there may be to it.
So this is an instant messaging conversation. The timings, because the messaging only shows and records the time of the message, it does not record the date of the message. The date in the header would indicate when the message was sent, and so the latest point in time where the messages could be. It correlates quite nicely with the last message of 17:55 and the message being sent at 17:56 and 14 seconds on the 14th of June. Previous entries to 17:55 could easily have been on previous day or days earlier to that. So it could be the 13th of June or earlier. In terms of how many days, I can't recall.
So just to make sure that I've understood that, and bear with me for a moment, please. If we take that, the date and time of the email that is sent as the 14th of June 2016, 1756 and 14 seconds, any of the elements of the conversation within this email must have been exchanged between you and N5857 before the date and time of the email.
Correct.
You can't say whether they were on that day or previous days.
Because it is time-based only, then the last one then correlates with the email date.
And so
Prior to that, it could be a day before.
So for those who are working with the paper, it may be a little easier, but if we were to look at the front page with the details of to and from and date provided, and then to compare that with the very last page, which is the 1755 entry, which is the one I'd asked you about, is that the time correlation you're referring to?
Yes.
So we see the final entry in this list of conversation exchanges is timed at 1755, and thank you very much for bringing those 2 pages up. So for those who are looking on the screen now, if we look to the right-hand side, we'll see the final entry timed at 1755, sent by N5857 to you, now picked out in yellow, thank you again. First pass at S-Elite on a virtual machine, so slow. And then we go back to the date and time for the email which provides this exchange between the two of you. That we see is timed at 1756 on the 14th of June.
Yes.
And you're linking the final message of 1755 with the time stamp for the email of 1756.
Yes.
And in your mind, that suggests that the message at 1755 is likely to have been sent on the 14th of June, just before the email was sent.
Yes.
On the other hand, it may have been sent on any other day prior to the 14th of June, and there's simply a coincidence that the last message is a minute before the email is sent.
Yes. Because the instant messaging only records the time, the only thing you can say is that it records the time. And it must be before the time and date on the email.
3 at 1752. Get that up. It's N5857 asking, during migration we may have some data replicated to begin with, but most will drop off. It has been to IAA 36, which was accepted, but not to the 2IC unit. They can factor that into their plans. Can you help us with what was meant there by some data replicated to begin with, but most will drop off?
I just want to check what IA 36, if I may.
You'll find that in tab 1, last page.
Entry 46 on page 2
Yeah,
behind
I
tab
see.
1.
So there's several pieces of work that are ongoing at the same time. A couple of lines beforehand, there's reference to RFQ 28, which is a different request for quote, I think RFQ stands for. So request for a quotation for a piece of work. DR refers to disaster recovery, and that is a function that the customer had required and again specified the requirements therefore. The migration and data replicated is in relation to replicating data between the two sites as part of the disaster recovery function, I believe. So as the migration between the old and the new storage systems is progressing, we have to be cognizant that we don't want to lose any of the live data that's ongoing, and be able to have the shortest window. As I said, the problem is the system has to go down at some point. We want the system to be down as little as possible. So we want most of the data to be migrated to put into the new system, and then the system turned on with least handover, least changeover. Because at some point there has to be a system shut down as far as users are concerned, so the last bit of data can be replicated across and then pushed across down to the other DR site.
Thank you.
Can we leave that exchange, please, now? And what I'd like to do, please, is to just check something with you. When discussing S-delete, you've confirmed that in terms of the effect on any data that is on the old storage system, it deletes already deleted data.
It zeros already deleted data. The difference is, as far as the server is concerned, as far as the front-end point of view of the system is concerned, the data is gone. As far as the raw file system is concerned, the data is still there. The way computers delete data, the data is never truly deleted. It only marks it as deleted and available for future use. So if somebody were to delete a file and somebody else comes along and writes a large file across the system, that file would overwrite the same space because the system would say, well, that's free space, I can use it. This could be repeated on many times. So files put in, files deleted, files put in, files deleted. In terms of whether that is overwriting the same space, the same area of the disk, that is hard to determine because there are many read and writes and delete operations that are going on all throughout the system as a normal function of the system. So writing zeros to the data only aligns the front end with the back end.
What I wanted to ask about, though, was the live data. So rather than dealing with data that had already been deleted, because
Yes.
we've had your help in some detail on that, and I don't want to go back over that again. What I'd like to check with you is this. As far as you understood it, was there any risk to live data when S-delete was run?
No.
So in terms of migrating what the customer wanted to be migrated, you understood that if you ran S-delete, it wouldn't have any effect on writing zeros or ones over any of that data?
No, the specific option was to write into free space. What the server saw as free space, so it would not touch any existing files.
Now, can I just check this with you? In terms of the individuals who were working at the customer site and responsible for the running of S-delete, you told us you were off-site, but occasionally present at meetings on-site.
Yes.
And among those third-line IT support engineers you've told us about, who would be responsible primarily for S-delete and how it ran on-site whilst the customer was there?
That could have been any of the third-line engineers. I think N5857 was the person who, because he was available and had done the training course and had been up to date on the process, he was the person who was the one that was doing it. It could have been any of the third-line engineers that were taking out the task.
And what I'd like to ask you about is this, please. Could we just go back to the red file together for a moment? And could we open up divider number 1 and to look at the list of names on either of those two pages? And what I'd like to remind you is I don't want you to read out anything that is in red.
Understood.
What I'd like to ask you, please, is this. Those individuals who you understood were aware at UKSF of S-delete and might need to give permission for S-delete to be run. Do you see any of the names of those individuals on either of these two pieces of paper? And if so, could you give us the cipher number, please?
My memory for names is poor. My memory for IT systems is quite good. Memory for names is poor. I don't recall specific names of who was on site at the time, so I cannot identify specific names.
In terms of job title, if that's something you can remember, and you won't find that necessarily in the list I've just invited you to look at, so I'm going to test your memory insofar as it doesn't relate to IT systems, I'm afraid. Is there a particular job title or role, again, not giving a name of anyone, but is there a job title or role that you recall being someone who had to be liaised with over this?
It would be we would class the system manager or the person who is responsible on the customer site for the system.
Manager or
Yes.
the person responsible on the customer site.
So he would be classed as the. So if anything that needed to have approval, then it would go through one of these, the system manager for the site. I recognise some of the names here that were part of the change team, but they would not have been the person necessarily who was the responsible person for the system itself. Yeah.
Can I ask you this, please? Prior to S-Delete being run on any of the virtual machines, were you aware whether or not the military police had any interest in the data that was stored on the ITS-1 server system?
No.
After S-Delete had been run, and even after the migration onto 3PAR had been completed, were you made aware of whether or not the military police had any interest in ITS-1 or what was saved on it?
No.
Were you spoken to by anyone from UKSF about the use of S-Delete and about the migration process from Data Programme 1 to 3PAR?
Not in regards to the Royal Military Police, no.
Were you asked to give an account on behalf of the company to anyone at UKSF about the migration process or why S-Delete had been run?
No.
Can I just check something, sir? It may be that you have a question there as well.
Indeed.
Please, if you ask your question, sir, I'll follow on if I need to. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Glasgow. You mentioned just now, in answer to Mr. Glasgow, explained that S-Delete would zero already deleted data.
Yes.
And as so far as the front end point was concerned, the data was gone.
Yes.
However, as far as the raw file system was concerned, the data was still there.
Yes.
So if someone was subsequently told that S-Delete made the data completely irrecoverable, that would be wrong in your view, would it?
In terms of complete irrecoverable, I would say that would be wrong. In terms of under normal operation of a system, then yes, that would be under. We're writing zeros, and so you should see zeros. But in terms of looking at the underlying levels on the disk, then that should be recoverable.
And if you wanted then to recover the data from the raw end, what sort of process would that involve, and how difficult would that be?
I understand that there are techniques that can read the data from the disks at the lowest level. So as I explained earlier, the difference in voltage levels or levels that can indicate that it's not actually at the zero level, but it's somewhere above or below the 0 and 1 levels. And so by analysing that, they can see a history that would get you to that level. And so by getting to that history, they can recover some idea in terms of what the data could have been in the past.
And that would be a specialist job.
Yes, very much so.
And there are people that do that.
Yes.
Thank you.
Could I just ask you to look at a document that you've not seen before? And before I do so, I'm just going to show your legal team this particular document so I can clear something up.
Thank you.
Can I explain that what I've just handed to the witness, those who have the the paper bundle available to them will find it behind divider number 45. And I appreciate that what I've just invited you to look at is unlikely to be something you've seen before, sir. Now, it's come up on our screen. And what I'm going to do immediately is invite your attention to the date. We can see February 2017.
Yes.
And it's described in bold as Operation Northmore Unit Investigation into the use of S-Delete application on storage area network servers.
Yes.
Now, in case this helps you before we look at anything, if we look to the last page for a moment, do you see it's signed off by someone with the cipher number N5858?
Yes.
And I'm going to invite you, you're already doing it, thank you very much indeed. Red file behind divider number 1. If you run your finger down on the first page behind divider number 1 to entry number 8, the cipher number there for N5595, and again, please don't read out anything that is written in red. But when you look alongside the entry for 5595, it may be that that name assists you. I don't know.
No.
Right. In which case, close the red file up for a moment. And can I take you back to the first page and to explain why it is that I want to ask you about this particular document? If you look to the number paragraphs, you'll see contained within paragraph number 2 is the following entry. To assist with the investigation, the following people were interviewed on the 19th of January 2017. And if we look down to the entry C, so the third entry down, records your cipher number, N5858, and described as the 4th line engineer.
Yes.
And why I've asked you to look at that, please, sir, is that according to the information provided by the author of the report, N5595, he spoke to 5 individuals, one of whom appears to be you,
Okay.
when carrying out the investigation into the use of S-Delete.
This is possible. If I was at the site and I was asked about it, I don't recall. Some years ago. When I am dealing with a generic support issue, if the problem is resolved, I tend to forget about it. So, in my mind, this was resolved. So, I put it away, I've forgotten about it. I've zeroed it, if you like.
Is it recoverable?
I believe so, yes. It needs some forensic analysis, but it was recoverable. Yeah, so it is certainly evident from this that I was asked the questions. I may not have been, I probably was aware. Because at the customer site, they tend not to, in all cases, wear uniforms. They all could appear to be civilians. I can't recall whether the RMP would have been in uniform or not. But I would have said the same thing there as I've said here.
Thank you very much. I have no further questions. Can I just check something? No. So unless you have any questions for N5858.
No, thank you very much, Mr. Glasgow. Thank you very much indeed for coming to give your evidence. You're free to go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So before the witness gets up and leaves, can I just interrupt that process? Because obviously I'm going to invite you to rise, sir, in a moment. The next witness we're turning to deal with is being called in open. I've not yet had an opportunity to meet with him, and I don't know whether, I know from Mr. Greeny, wishes to be present at any discussion either, but ordinarily I'd only ask for 5 or 10 minutes, but could I ask for just a little longer?
Indeed.
Please? Could I have until 22, please?
Let's rise till 11:45, if that would be.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Glasgow.
Please, you, sir. The next witness is James Pridden, who is sat at the side of court. But I invite him, please, to step into the witness box. Thank you very much.
Mr. Pridden, could you come into the witness box, please? Thank you.
Take the book and repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do be seated.
Before we embark on Mr. Pridden's evidence, can I simply remind everyone through you, sir, that we're now sitting in open, which is why we're using Mr. Pridden's full name.
Indeed.
Could you give the court your name, please, sir?
It's James Robert Pridden.
Mr. Pridden, we have the benefit of a witness statement from you dated the 5th of September of this year, a witness statement that was provided directly to the inquiry in response to a request that the inquiry made of the Royal Military Police back in May of this year. Can I check, sir, that you have available in front of you a black file, and behind that there should be a blue tab which is numbered 4, and behind that divider number 16 should, I hope, appear to be your witness statement. And unhelpfully, we've not bothered to number the pages, but we have at least numbered the paragraphs. So if you've got the same one that I've got, it should run to 37 paragraphs.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Can I make a suggestion? Because there's a number of exhibits that we're going to be looking at together. Can I suggest you take the witness statement out of the file?
Yes, sure.
Because it may be that I'm going to invite your attention to certain paragraphs within it. But if you have it out, then you'll be able to look at the exhibits separately.
Okay.
Those who have the documents, I'm going to refer to the paragraph numbers in your statement and also to the dividers in the bundle you've got. In addition, the exhibits will also be appearing on the screen, which you can see to your right-hand side. And it's a matter for you entirely whether you work from the paper copy or what's up on the screen.
Okay, thank you.
If you aren't clear what I'm asking, or if you aren't sure where we are in the bundle or what particular document we're looking at, can I give you this reassurance? It's my fault and not yours. So will you tell me, and I will endeavour to correct what mistake I have made.
Sure.
If something isn't clear also, just let me know. I'll rephrase the question or try to help you as best as I can.
Okay.
Right. Now, before we embark on dealing with the matters that are set out within your witness statement, can I just check with you now? Presently, you are employed as a partner conducting cybercrime investigations within a prominent London-based consultancy. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
The reason why you've answered a request made of the Royal Military Police is that previously you were employed within the RMP. Is that right?
That's right, yeah.
And it may be that you don't need to look at it, but I'm going to refer to paragraph 3 for others who have the statement with them. Could I just ask you to set out your career within the RMP so that we have a better understanding of the role that you undertook and the assistance you can give us today?
So I was employed for 22 years from 1995 in the Royal Military Police. During that career, I joined the Special Investigation Branch. And during that part of my career, I got asked to join a new formed team called the High Tech Crime Team. I joined that team in, I think it was 2007, roughly around then. And I served in that till I finished my career in 2017.
And as part of your role within that cybercrime team, was that a specialist unit that had been set up within the RMP to conduct digital forensic investigations into both serious crime and security-related incidents within the armed forces?
That's right, yeah.
Now, again, since it might be relevant to some of the questions that I'm going to ask your help with, I believe you hold a number of qualifications that relate to forensic computing and digital and forensic and cybercrime. Could you just take us through those, please? If you need to refer to it, it's set out in your paragraph 4.
Sure. So I hold a postgraduate certificate in forensic computing from Cranfield University. I'm a certified CISP, certified information system security professional. And over my career, I've done many courses in cyber investigation and forensic investigation. I've given evidence in court, I've been expert witness trained, and I've conducted hundreds of investigations.
And in terms of the expert witness training you've done, is that linked to your knowledge and expertise in respect of cybercrime and digital forensics?
It is, yeah.
Now, what I'd like to ask you, please, is your involvement with Operation Northmore, and in particular, your and the team's interest in the ITS-1 server that was used by UKSF, okay? And before we embark on that, can I just explain to you that we've heard evidence from a number of people thus far. In particular, we've had the details of how ITS-1 worked and the detail about the migration process that was been taken from one set of servers to another. And we've also heard about the use of SDelete. These are all matters that I'm going to ask you about in due course, but we've had the advantage of hearing from some of those who were directly involved with that procedure already, okay?
Okay.
So first this, please. ITS-1 and yours and the RMP's understanding of its potential significance to Operation Northmore. How important to your investigation and to the RMP investigation titled Operation Northmore was that particular storage system, ITS-1?
So, ITS-1 is a terminology I'd not heard before until I was asked to give a statement of inquiry. We referred to it as...
I don't want you to tell us what it was referred to as, please.
Okay.
So I'm very sorry, that's my fault. I've not corrected that with you beforehand, so I apologise straight away. ITS-1 is the name by which a particular server is known, a particular IT system is known. I don't want you to give us the name of any particular individual unless I ask you for that name.
Sure.
I certainly don't want you to give us the name of anything relating to UKSF unless you've at least checked with us first, okay?
Okay.
I will endeavour to ask my questions in such a way that won't, I hope, lead you to say something you shouldn't. But again, I may need to stop you at times. It's my fault, not yours. Okay? So ITS-1, as you understood it at the time to be the ITS system in operation by UKSF, is that correct?
Yes, it was the one that was being used in the UK.
Right, and I don't want you to tell me any more than that. Okay.
The problem with it is that I need to be sure that we're referring to the same system, because there's many systems in the investigation that we were going after, and that was the problem when we were having my statement taken. Was we took a bit of time to understand which system you were actually talking about, but
can I help you to this extent? There's a red file on your right hand side.
yeah.
If you look within that, behind divider number 4, and behind divider number 4, you should have a sheet that has on the left-hand side black writing,
Yeah.
and on the right-hand side red.
Yeah.
Anything that's in red, I do not want you to read out, please, Mr.
Sure.
Pridden.
Sure.
So, look to the left-hand column, run your finger down to the entry for ITS-1, which is about a third of the way down.
I've got it. It's the same one. Yeah, it's the one I'm talking about.
So I'm not going to ask you what is written in red, but what I'm asking you about is that particular system, which was referred to as ITS-1 in your witness statement, and I'm going to refer to it as ITS-1 when I ask you questions, okay?
Fine.
If we need to ask you questions about another system, I'll take you back to this and we can clarify it. Can I ask you to put that to one side for a moment?
Yeah, sure.
Now, let's go back to where we were. Now we know the system that we're talking about. Again, my fault, not yours, and I'm very sorry. Was that an IT system that you and the RMP had identified as potentially relevant to the Operation Northmore investigations?
Yes, it was, yeah.
Was it a system that you had identified relatively early on in the course of your inquiries?
Well, we knew the organisation involved, and we knew historically of that system, and so and we knew we needed digital evidence in relation to some of the allegations, and so it was identified as straight away as a possible source of information.
And just if I can help you possibly with any dates, the file that you've got available to you, if you were to look behind divider number 17, please, and for anyone that's trying to bring this up on the screen, it should be the third page behind tab 17. It's double-sided, so I'm sorry, it's going to be the second piece of paper, but the front, so if you look there, you've got it in your right hand, you see it's headed 13th of, back a page, there you go,
Yep.
13th of October 2015. It's back one page on the digital document, please, I'm sorry. So it's numbered in the bottom right corner as 42. I'll just wait while it comes up on the screen. We've got here the minutes of an Operation Northmore management meeting held at Campion Lines on the 13th of October of 2015. Okay? And what I'd like to ask you, please, is you just run your finger down the page dealing with item 2 and the team 1 update. And do you see entry number 3? And just read entry number 3 to yourself there, please, if you would.
Yep.
So we can see here that certainly as at the 13th of October of 2015, the update that you provided during the management meeting for Op Northmore was that you were at that stage engaging with Special Forces at UKSF4 in order to strategise the recovery of data en masse from the ITS-1 system. Okay. Presumably, if you were already engaging with Special Forces as at the 13th of October, the possible relevance of this system was something that had already come to yours and the RMP's attention.
Yes, like I say, we already knew about the system because of previous inquiries that had taken place. And so we were aware of what it was and that it held information.
And as we see from the entry in the management meeting, you were strategising the recovery of data en masse from the system. And what did that mean, please, Mr. Pridden?
Well, essentially, because of the seriousness of the allegations and the importance of data in the investigation, particularly pictures, communications, that sort of thing, we needed to ensure that we recovered all data, including data which may have been deleted. And so to actually do a data recovery, sorry, my voice is going because I had a flu. To ensure that you recovered, there's no way of just taking deleted data out of a system. You have to take the whole system or a copy of the whole system to actually obtain that data. So that's why when you talk about en masse, that's what they're talking about. They're talking about the whole system, all of the data. That's what they meant.
And when you say the whole system, do you mean a forensic copy of the system, or did you actually want to take the system itself?
Well, what we asked for was a forensic copy. However, as time developed on, there was a discussion around what the operational impact would be of doing that, and should we have access to all of the data. And we came to an understanding that because they were doing a hardware refresh, that posed an ideal opportunity to take the data. There was also other issues around taking the data, because at that time it was a case of where we were going to put it, because obviously we needed a storage facility which was up to a certain classification, and the RMP didn't have one. Hence why they went to Newquay and St Morgan to develop the base there. But what we were going to do with it and how we were going to deal with it was the next step in the process. And so there was a lot of discussions around, well, if we did take it, what could we actually do with it and where could we put it? Because the facilities that we had didn't meet the security classifications at that time.
So just so that I can check, the interest that you had in any particular data that was on ITS1. You were looking for any live data that was on the system and any deleted data that might have been deleted by any of the users.
Yes.
Were you looking also for emails that might have been exchanged with people?
Yes, that's live data.
Okay. And was your idea that either by obtaining the system in the end or by getting a forensic copy, you would have a perfect picture of exactly what was on the system?
Yes, so essentially we needed to, there's only really, at the start of any investigation, when you recover digital media, you only really have one chance in getting it. You can't really go back because, it's just too problematic, and normally the investigation takes quite some time, so you can't go back 6 months, because if you're looking for deleted data, that's volatile, it can be destroyed, and so you need to get it at the start in reality.
So when we think about getting it at the start, once you'd identified ITS1 as potentially having information of relevance to the RMP inquiries, were you personally, and then you, the team, interested in obtaining it as quickly as possible?
Yes.
And it perhaps is obvious to you, but for those that aren't completely au fait with the powers that are available to the RMP, if you had wanted to, did you have the power to seize ITS1 or the data saved upon it?
Yes.
And those are powers that you could, if you'd wanted to, as the Royal Military Police, have exercised in order effectively to go in and take what you needed?
Yes, but as I think, the decision whether to do that would rest with the SIO. Obviously, we were the expert arm to provide them capability to actually deal with the data and recover the data in a proper way. We wouldn't be the people who would apply for the warrant or do the search, and we'd end up at the search to recover it in the end. But that process sits with the SIO.
And we'll come to look at some of the file entries that relate to decisions that were taken to try to put them in context in due course. Now, what I'd like to ask you about, please, is your understanding of data from Afghanistan that have been sent back to ITS1. Can I ask you to look for a moment, if you wouldn't mind, paragraph 6 on the second page of your statement. I just want to ask you about what you've written there, please, Mr. Pridden.
So, obviously, in any investigation involving digital media, there's a process that you go through to establish what the footprint of that data is and where it sits, so you can then establish where you need to go and what you need to recover. And during the course of the inquiries that we made, we were told that the system in Afghanistan was broken into various different servers which were all interlinked. That data was, at the end of the operation, copied, what they thought was important was copied onto one of these systems, and all the rest were destroyed in theatre, and they brought one system back and we recovered that system. But what they also said is that backups and data were sent back to the UK to ITS1 as a process of data retention or data preservation, so when we recovered the system from the SF in London,
Thank you. Mr. Glasgow.
So thank you for the break. Mr. Pridden, just taking you back to your paragraphs 9 and onwards, and thank you for taking the time to look at those for me. And I'm sorry, I should probably have invited your attention to those before you came in, and it's my fault. But what I wanted to ask you is this, please, sir. If we look to the end of your paragraph 9, there is reference there to possible gaps in data. And what I want to ask you about is this. If you were made aware of possible gaps in data, how did you become aware of that?
Okay, so we recovered the one server we discussed from Afghanistan, and that was then taken to a secure location and interrogated. We were able to get a secure location. I'm not sure if it's on here.
Is it recorded behind our divider number 3 at all? If not, you can write it down, sir, if you need to.
It's not on the list. It's in my statement as, well, I'll just say the word that's in my statement, if that's okay. It's at the end of paragraph 8. The data was then sent to...
Yes, to Collingwood.
To Collingwood.
Yes, thank you, and thank you for being careful about that.
So the data was sent there, and we set up a temporary... we had to have a very high security level to access the data. That was made clear to us by a number of parties involved in the recovery of that single server. Whilst we were doing an investigation into that server, the UK Special Forces had set up a team which allowed the investigation team and other parties to look at data that they'd harvest. And there was a comparison between, we found this, have you got it over there? And it wasn't. So we knew, and that was data that they'd taken from ITS1 and other locations. So we knew there was a gap in data for the data we had in Collingwood from that one server from Afghanistan. And so that's what became apparent. And when you talk about the process of how, what was explained to us about, there was many nodes out in Afghanistan for these servers. What was deemed to be important was copied onto one of them, and the rest were destroyed. There was a lot of data lost when those servers were destroyed. And so the one that came back to UK was a partial footprint of the data from Afghanistan. It wasn't a full.
And were you hoping, therefore, that by recovering a forensic copy of ITS1 that you might get the whole footprint?
Well, you in these circumstances, you never get everything, but you have to. We made the assumption that there was a lot. We'd seen there was data on there from Afghanistan. We were told that the process was to move data between the two systems, so they knew there was a system, so that's the reason why we wanted it. But we didn't. We wanted to get everything, obviously, but in these circumstances, you probably wouldn't get everything, but you get as much as you can.
And when it came to getting as much as you can, was any consideration given to trying to get any of the backups to see if that might assist in filling any of the gaps that you thought there were?
There was a discussion around backups in that meeting, and but the understanding was that, again, that doesn't include deleted data. It doesn't include some areas which they told us we'd seen data, and so that's just part of the puzzle. The issue we had was what were we going to do with the data once we had it? Where were we going to put it? We couldn't put it in Collingwood. The building and the place wasn't big enough for us to do that, and so we had to have an alternative location to deal with the data of that size. So we we asked them to preserve backups and not destroy them. And the plan was that when we took a forensic copy, we'd take the backups at the same time.
And insofar as you asked the UKSF to preserve backups, going back how far? Was it backups at a certain point in time or covering a window?
Well, we just said all backups that could possibly contain Afghanistan data. You know, at the end of the day, we didn't have enough information from them, and they didn't know in that meeting what, you know, the length of time and backups could cover.
Now, that meeting that you described to us that you believe Staff Sergeant Sivieri was present at, that you thought was in or around October of 2015, which is when I took you to the management meeting minutes from Campion Lines. This is still at a period of time when there is engagement between you and UKSF as to how to recover all of the data and indeed a forensic copy of ITS-1.
Yeah, there was. We didn't just engage them on that. There were other systems we were talking about, but yeah.
I'm asking about this one particular system, please.
Yes.
Right. Now, can I just take you on in your statement to paragraph 16, which is something you've touched on already, but I just want to clarify what is in there. When it came to your discussions on behalf of the RMP with UKSF, and those were discussions about getting access to ITS-1 in its entirety, what, if any, concerns or impediments were there to your obtaining a forensic copy of ITS-1 when you first spoke about it? It may be, if you look at paragraph 16, it'll help you there.
So they had reservations about how we would take the data, take a forensic image, because it's quite intensive. Ordinarily, you turn computers off, you take the disks out, and then you forensically copy them. And that means turning stuff off, which is obviously on an operating systems bad. So there was some discussion around that. There was discussion around, you know, how it would impact the system operationally in regards to if we did something live, so we didn't have to turn the things off, how much resource that would use on the system, and generally they had an uneasiness about the fact that the system wasn't that stable, and it may trigger some sort of malfunction or something like that in their system. Hence why they were doing a hardware refresh a year later. So there was reticence around it. There was also reticence around us having access to data which wasn't Afghanistan data in that. But when you're taking a forensic copy, it is an all or nothing sort of solution in reality. Especially if you're going after deleted data, because we don't know what's in that deleted data before we take it and stuff. So that was, and I think that was, I wasn't involved in all of the discussions because the SIO led some of those discussions, and there was a lot of debate around why do we need access to that? Why should we be enabled access to that? And I think they were worried about the security of us holding the information as well.
As you mentioned earlier on, you needed to have an appropriately secure location to store information at a particular classification level. Yeah. Now, it's evident from what was said by you in the management meeting in October 2015, and also from the meeting that you've described to us with you and possibly Staff Sergeant Sivieri with UKSF, that you were personally involved in trying to get access to ITS-1 and all of the data, including the deleted data upon it. But in addition to your efforts, did you become aware that the RMP corporately were also trying to engage with UKSF to secure access to the ITS-1 server?
Yeah, I was aware that, you know, it had been pushed up the chain of command, and there were efforts to, because, you know, they didn't want to give it to us, essentially. we went back to the SIO with that information about, they've got these concerns, and I think then they engaged and they had their own conversations around why they didn't want to provide it.
And as far as you're aware, when this was pushed up the chain of command, did it go as high as Provost Marshal Army?
Yes, it did, yeah.